Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us for this evening for educators. My name is Golda Dop Ovias and I am the K-12 educator here at the Utah Museum of Contemporary Art. And we will be discussing our newest exhibition about home, Heimzo, Heimir, Hiem, Hiem, Hum, Home. And I am joined by our curator, Jared Stephenson.
Hi everybody, thanks for attending this virtual version of the tour. Like Golda said, my name is Jared Stephenson. I'm the curator of exhibitions here at the Utah Museum of Contemporary Art. And just a little bit about my role at the museum. My job is to come up with themes that I think are relevant to our community and develop exhibitions around those themes. So typically in about 6 month chunks, but those themes then inform the majority of the exhibitions that then are also shown outside of the main gallery to help kind of fully form that idea or fully investigate that idea.
Mm-hmm. And it is my honor to present all of the artwork to Utah students. So Jared, what inspired you to create this group exhibition specifically?
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with the fact that we were all restricted to our homes for quite a long time. So, thinking about what it meant to not be able to leave a home or to have a home to be quarantined to, or what does it mean to not have a home to be quarantined in, and how did that work for people? So the idea was born from that time, and then it was going through and kind of, as the name, the title of the show states, like thinking about how home was originally conceived of, and then also how it's changed through time. So each one of those different versions of the word home come from history and sort of origins of languages. But each one of those languages then did have a word that meant home. And the final one, Ham, means a place where souls are gathered. So that really informed where a lot of the work was selected from and how I structured the exhibition.
Amazing.
Yeah.
We are excited to bring you a little bit behind the scenes. Jared is in the middle of preparing and installing the artwork for this show, but it is our goal to help you see how you can incorporate more art and visual language into your classroom to make the students feel more at home. Now we are standing in the middle of our main gallery, and Jared, the title includes many variations of the origin of the word home. And the show itself, the artwork in the show, is many different mediums. So what do you see the relationship between the title and the mediums being?
Yeah. Good question. So I think for me, when I was researching or looking for the origins of the word home in different languages, what I noticed is essentially they all sound the same or start the same, but because of that, there were maybe different ideas of what home was for those when they developed that. So within the artwork, there's pieces or mediums that are used that's similar to each other, or sometimes there's something aesthetically similar to each other, but each one of those artists has a different relationship to what the word home means to them and what they're investigating. So it's interesting to think that the piece behind us, Frank Poor's work, is a photograph of a building from his hometown where the building has disappeared. It's been removed due to urbanization within this small town. But it's very similar in looks to another work by an artist named Tanika Johnson. And Tanika Johnson is looking at home inequity in the Chicago area. And so they're very similar. They look like similar houses, but they're very different ideas of what home is and how they're investigating. So it seemed that as I was looking for artists for the show, that a lot of the artists that were looking at home specifically and sort of the themes that I was interested in were very focused on sort of presenting the reality of the situation rather than maybe making a painting of it or something along those lines. So if people come to the museum, what they're going to see is a lot of photography and a lot of video, and one work in particular that is referencing photography, but it's done with charcoal on paper. So, and that work is by an artist named Aaron Fostel.
Amazing. It's really interesting to see these interpretations of the feeling and concept of home through very contemporary mediums. We're a contemporary art museum, so the art of our time, and it's great to introduce students to it because they immediately have something in common with the artists. They're living in the same world, experiencing some of the same pandemics and things that affect all of us, and so there's a very wide door to start to interpret. It's accessible.
Right, and I think that's a really good point because also, a lot of people have a camera on this thing in their pocket now, so they're able to document things in a very similar way to the artists that are in the exhibition. And photography as a medium is something that also feels familiar for a lot of people because they've have photo books that they look back through, or digital photo books that they use. So there's something that allows the viewer to tie themselves to the work through that medium as well.
That's how I remember the homes I used to live in, that even from my childhood are photo albums.
Interesting that you say that. Sorry to kind of go off of that. I recently gave a talk about the idea of home, and I went back and I found the 20 homes that I've lived in over my lifetime through Google Maps that has images of the homes that I lived in. So I was able to, in the same way, go back and look at all these places that have informed who I am as a person and how home has been important to me. So.
And you had many. You were an Army brat, correct?
Yeah, moved around a lot every 4 years.
Yeah.
So.
Well, thank you. We'll move on to the next piece and next question. Now we are standing inside this tiny home that you're building in the main gallery. Talk about an ambitious project. Can you tell us more about building this home, the structure, and why you chose to do it?
Sure. When I first started thinking about the exhibition, the idea of building a small house or a tiny house in the show popped into my head for a couple of reasons. But I liked the idea of showing how a house is built to people as they come in. You don't typically get to see what's inside the walls or kind of the structure that goes into making something like that. So as I was selecting artists, I found an artist named Niko Krvanek, who we've actually worked with before. But he was doing a project where he was going back through his old family photo albums and removing all the doubles or the blurry photos or something. Those sort of like pictures you take while you're trying to get to the right picture, and it's almost in a way like the things that you need to do to build the photo album is the way that I was thinking of his images, and thought that it would be a good fit to put inside the house. In the same way that you get to see the structure or not the final version, not the version you want people to see necessarily, but the version that's in process of being built, similar to Niko's photos. So I approached Niko and asked if he would be interested in that, and got a pretty resounding yes from him. So essentially inside the house, there'll be a 4-foot by 8-foot table with a photo quilt, basically just a large photo print that'll be on top of the table. So you'll be able to enter into the house and walk around the table and take a look at the images of his growing up here in Salt Lake City. It is an ambitious project, but it felt like a good way to activate the space as well, and to reference, I live in downtown Salt Lake. I have a bungalow from 1918 that has a very similar way that is built, and sort of the style of the house feels like it's of this place. And I thought that was also a good way to relate it back to Salt Lake and the way we think about home, and maybe some of the issues that we're going through with homelessness, and housing inequity and high rents and mortgages and all the things that are happening in Salt Lake as it grows and changes. This felt like a way to connect to that and to the history of the place. So.
And I love seeing just the skeleton of the house. I think even if you were to finish it, it wouldn't be quite as compelling because you walk into this very large room. The main gallery is 5,500 square feet. And so putting this tiny house inside of it, and then you still get to walk in, it's very immersive, but to just see the structure, it kind of reminds me of like the skeleton of an idea and how you build upon that, or the concept of home. And just because you have a physical structure, that doesn't make it a home where you feel safe and yourself.
And there's an openness to it too. A lot of these artists are really talking about them growing up, what home was for them. They're really giving you entrance into their history and their narrative and their story. So the house does the same thing. It's open. It's visible. You get to see inside from the outside.
Right.
So.
And that leads to our next question, is how you curate and design a space, especially a space this large, to be welcoming and inviting.
Yeah. Clearly it's different every time. And sometimes what I try to do is think about the theme of the exhibition and how that informs how I want the space to feel. So thinking about home, I did want it to feel open and to have spaces where people could come in a way, inhabit the gallery like you would a home. And so there are large open areas for that to happen. It's not closed off in any way, but there are essentially different rooms or different areas created throughout the exhibition that relate back to a room or a place where you can sort of be in.
Right.
And so, yeah, it changes every time. This time it made sense to do this. Sometimes I do want it closed off. Sometimes I want it more intimate. Sometimes I want to play with the architecture in the space. Sometimes I'm thinking about, we have these great windows up above the gallery that feel sort of like a fishbowl, but also allow for different vantage points into the exhibition. And to think about how people are seeing it from multiple vantage points is something that also influences the way that I think about the exhibitions and installing them.
Absolutely. On field trips, we walk to our education studio, and you get a kind of aerial view of the gallery, and the students always comment on something they hadn't noticed before, and I let them know that the walls in here can move, and so it's kind of Tetris for you, rearranging them with each new exhibition. And I love the students as well. I tell them with contemporary art, it can feel a little intimidating at first. So I say it's more about the idea and like what questions it presents to you. We're not asking you to take this art home and hang it in your living room or in your bedroom. You don't even have to really like it per se, but it's just about like the new perspectives that you can explore because of the art. So I think in this show, it's such a great example. Even though it's about home, we're not trying to reconstruct a living room with a mantle and that very typical idea of what it means, but just thinking about home in this very broad sense, beyond Utah, but also what it means to live here. And we're excited for students to see more of that. And I encourage all teachers to use more of the art of our time with their students, contemporary art, artists that are alive and can present that idea and perspective from this lived experience.
Yeah, agreed.
So thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you.
So we are standing in front of Courtney Kessel's photographs, and Jared, one similarity that you have with educators is that you curate. You curate art exhibitions and teachers curate curriculum, but both require a lot of deliberate thought to make sure that it is both diverse and nuanced in the things that you present to students or museum visitors. So how do you go about that, making sure that it's inclusive and diverse and that you're telling multiple narratives?
Yeah. I think one thing that has become incredibly beneficial, whether or not we like it in our daily lives, is actually social media. So I do a lot of research for artists through social media, or find a gallery that I really like, and then I go through and I look at their list of artists. But that ability to have a broader pool of artists to choose from is really helpful to be able to tell those nuanced stories rather than kind of relying on the typical networks that probably existed before my time as a curator. But I do think it's interesting that you relate the two together, being an educator and being a curator, is prior to my time at the museum, I actually was a university adjunct professor, and a lot of the way that I think about putting exhibitions together came from the way that I put together lectures for particular assignments. So came up with a theme, looked for artists that were making work within that theme, and then presented that to students as a way to say, like, this is an idea about home, and this artist is thinking about home this way. Like, how do you think about home?
Right.
So parts of being an educator do make their way into what I do here. A lot of my process ends up being that I'll start with a list of probably 60 artists that I'm just kind of writing down as I find them, and then narrowing those down, because a lot of times they're looking at very similar things, and I want to make sure that there's diversity of thought and diversity of idea within the exhibition, so I do make changes based on that. And then really trying to know that the show and the idea of home is a broad one, so there's not infinite, but there's hundreds,
Right.
if not thousands, of different ideas.
It's impossible to tell all the stories.
Exactly, right. So try to think about ones, ideas then that also sort of feel relevant here or have a touch point here in Utah and in Salt Lake. We were talking about the work of Courtney Kessel behind us. The photographs are of just sort of run-of-the-mill images of the inside of her home, but what she's done is gone through and removed everything that is either her daughter's or a reference to her daughter or things of her daughter's that exist in the home, to talk about how people take up space within those homes and what it means to not have that person there, and sort of the absence that's felt through that. So really thinking about family, which the theme comes up a lot in the exhibition as well. So, and that's one of those places where different artists thinking about home, but not all, but a lot of them coming from that similar place of like the place where souls are gathered, where family is.
Right.
So
It's interesting to think about the space that you take up and the spaces you create, because again, during the pandemic, your homes became classrooms.
Yes.
I know you have two little boys, and so that was a really big change in your life. And that space where souls are gathered to accomplish different things, where your home suddenly had to be something that educators used to provide and create. So that's interesting to think about.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we made the joke all the time that, people say, well, I work from home, and we said, no, we live at work. So it was just a different way of thinking about the same idea there.
Right.
So yeah, a lot of shifts in what home is and how it's occupied now. Yeah.
And another similarity to the classroom setting is that before you create this exhibition or curriculum, it's quite a messy process. You can see that this house isn't complete yet. There's tools everywhere. And you said you pare it down from 60 artists. And I think you come at it from a very humble place, that you recognize you're seeking things that you don't know, and acknowledging that the people coming into the museum probably also don't. And that's where the learning and expanding your point of view is going to come from. So for educators, it can be a little bit intimidating to teach something or an art movement that you're not familiar with, but just having the humility to tell your students, I'm learning along with you. And it gets a little messy in the research side, and you're going to suddenly know what you don't know, but that's a beautiful place to be in. And if you invite your students to experiment and explore together, I think that's where the true deep learning happens. Yeah,
I think learning is a continuous process. And I think that there are so many voices out there to learn from. I feel fortunate to be in a position to be learning from them as I'm doing my job. So, Thank you. To discuss further the idea of the safe classroom and kind of the similarities to a gallery, is there any one classroom from your life, childhood, that was especially memorable or meaningful to you? Yeah, actually, two come to mind, and they both were similar in what I was learning in the two spaces, but I was living in Heidelberg, Germany at the time, lived on a military base, and the school that I went to was, ordinary, just like any other school. But I think that the two classrooms that really had a big influence on me moving forward in my life was my art classroom, and the introduction to my idea of art at the time was probably just making drawings, but I was introduced to making little sculptures or doing printmaking or doing ceramics, and the idea of these different materials and being able to explore ideas through materials was something that was important to me. And then at the same time, also a woodshop class. So in the woodshop class, I learned about materials, but more from a structural standpoint rather than an idea standpoint. So, you know, a lot of what is in the exhibition, like how do you build a house? A lot of that that's things that I learned through a woodshop class. I was making skateboard ramps at the time, but it's the same thing. It's frames that like give structure to something that you can play on, exist in, or something along those lines. So yeah, those two, I would say, were really important for me and actually influence everything that I still do to this day. So.
Yeah, really, I can see that.
Yeah.
And we work together every day, but also everyone watching this video, that it's very neat that what was really memorable is something that you still use as an adult in your career every day. So even if teachers think I'm not an art teacher, how am I going to incorporate art into my classroom? There's so many ways to do it. And it could be something that's applicable to that student for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
They're learning skills that they can draw upon that fulfill them and make it possible to present all of these interesting ideas to the world.
Yeah. Big influence. Big influence. Yeah.
It sounds like it.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us for this behind-the-scenes look at installing our next exhibition, and Jared, for all of your insights into the main concept of this show, home as a place where many souls are gathered, and for your insights into how that applies to the classroom setting. Jared, when can we see this show when it's finally finished and you're not building houses?
Yeah. That'll be nice. March 10th actually is the opening, and it'll be from 6 to 9 p.m. And the exhibition will run through July 15th of this year. And along with the opening on March 10th, there'll be 3 other exhibitions that are opening. Horacio Rodriguez in our projects gallery. We have Sperano and Mooney. It's a local architecture firm that will be in our exit gallery. And then Matthew Sketch will be in the airspace, the artist in residence space. So hope to see you at the opening. If you can't make it to opening, please stop by during the run of the show. And you'll be able to see firsthand and in person the works and the ideas that we've been discussing.
The rest of the evening will give you information on how to schedule a field trip to bring your students to see this in person. The rest of the evening for educators will include a workshop on how to teach art projects that explore this theme, whether you're teaching kindergartners or high schoolers. So thank you again for joining us. I hope you feel empowered to use more arts in your curriculum and to make students feel more at home and excited to come to school.